Hi, Erin. This is the Mola project that we talked about a couple weeks ago, and I thought that I would just make you a quick video so that you could get a feel for all the different steps, the materials that you're going to use with the kids, and kind of the timeline. So, in the last 2 trimesters, I have done this project with 6th graders, kind of towards the middle of the trimester, and it takes about 6 or 7 art classes. For some kids, it definitely takes 7, especially with the sewing component. So on the first day, what I would do is just give them a basic background of what a mola is. This is an actual mola from Panama, made by the Kuna, who are indigenous to Panama. And Jake Steiner, who is he's like an aide here at Malpe. He served in the Peace Corps in Panama and brought this back. So this is actually his mola that he bought for $5. Can you believe it? It's just crazy. And he let me use a lot of his artwork that he picked up while he was in his service. And so he said it's fine for us to use it through the end of the 3rd trimester, just make sure it gets back to him by the end of the school year. And what I show them is that, you would think that all of these levels of the embroidery are additive, but actually they're subtractive. And then I show them a couple of different videos that are kind of like slideshows of different types of molas, older molas, newer molas that are more contemporary, and we talk about what they're used for and how the Kuna see them today, and how it's become something that's a little bit more politically involved as well. But the very beginning of molas were actually painted on people's bodies. It was like their calling card or their name tag. So what I really want the kids to be thinking about is, how can you choose a symbol, which is a lot of what we've been doing in sixth grade during the trimester, about identity, using symbols to represent different things about yourself. So can you pick an animal or a plant that could represent you? So something that you find strong connection with, and the kids like this, but we kind of talk about what a spirit animal is in different cultures, animals that can offer protection to you, that sort of thing. So it has to have some real connection to them. Like, for instance, I always do the example of a sea turtle, because sea turtles are very resilient, sea turtles love the water, and sea turtles are very protective. So I feel like those characteristics kind of resonate with me, so I always give that example to them. And I can send you the links to the slideshows that I have, or you can just basically go on Pinterest or YouTube and look up molas, Kuna. You'll get all kinds of good images. So that would be on the first day. Also on the first day, I give them this packet, which I will leave you lots of copies in the drawer where all the mola stuff is. And what it is just basically 3 pieces of paper, and I have them do 3 different designs. If they want to do 3 different animals or elements of nature, that's fine. It can be the same animal, just a little bit different. That's cool too. So basically they just sketch in pencil, but there are a couple things that their mola has to have. Number 1, it has to be a really simple symbol. Keep in mind that they're going to be cutting this out of felt, so they can get some level of detail, but a lot of them, they just don't have the fine motor skills for that yet, like a high school student would. So simple is better. We know already about stylized realism and art that can be a little bit more simplified and abstract, and so that might work well. Basic shapes work really well, as you see, like I did this turtle and I split it into pieces. Also, if they have a little extra room, they can do different shapes, either decorative or they can do environmental stuff. Like sometimes they'll do like bubbles if they have a fish or seaweed or something like that. It has to be pretty big. If they make it too small, then it'll be really tricky to cut out, and that's not good. And also they have to think about keeping it away from the edge, because we actually do all our cutting from the inside of the felt. So if it touches the edge and they cut from the edge, then they're going to have one big mangled piece of felt. So those three things are most important. So once they have all their sketches, and that usually takes through the first day, then they're going to talk to you about which one will work the best. And on the second day, you can talk to them about felt. So our felt comes into big pieces, and I usually just cut it in half on the paper cutter. Works really well and it's really fast. So they need to think about a first top layer. And it doesn't matter what, color they decide to do. It can be something that's naturalistic, non-naturalistic, it's totally up to them. And the next thing that they're going to do is take their favorite design and cut it out. So just cut it out. And then I teach them how to cut from the center. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Obviously you could take a pencil on top of your felt and make a hole like this, and then cut from that. But even better, because this is the technique that we use for the felt, you can just fold it, do a little cut, and then cut from the center like this. And I tell them to keep the scraps because there are two ways to transfer the design onto the felt. And some of them really, really struggle with this part. It is really hard for them, so they need lots of reminders. Oh, you can't cut from the edge. But it's way better if they cut from the edge on this versus on this, because then they're going to have to do extra sewing. So then I show them how you can use the template to lay down on your felt like this and transfer your design. So they can do that. And sometimes they get a little frustrated because they're like, oh, well, this is going off the edge. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Look, you can draw one part and move it around. And they're like, wow, you're so smart, Mrs. Swan. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. You're so sweet. So you can do that. Or if you have all your little bitty pieces, you can take those and arrange those on there and cut those out, right? That's way harder. But some of them get really smart and they're like, hey, I have 4 flippers. I just need one, and then I can trace that one over and over again. I'm like, brilliant, you are smart. So they can do that, right? And just flip it. If you have a color like this, probably it'll show up if you trace with pencil. If it doesn't, we have like this Conte chalk. That works really well. And if that doesn't work, you can always use Sharpie. But the tricky part with Sharpie is it's going to leave a mark and then they're going to have to flip it over. Sometimes they get really confused about that. So help them out. So just show you an example of just one of these. But I usually show them a full one so they get the idea that you're just tracing inside or around if you're using the positive spaces. And then we review how to cut again. Can you cut from the side? Of course not, because then you're going to get a big mangled piece of felt. Instead, I show them, remember, you can just do a little trim, make a hole, and then start cutting out. And we really talk about staying inside of your shape, because if you go outside of your shape, then the borders between other shapes are going to get really weak, and it doesn't work as well. And I purposefully do a couple that are really neat and a couple that look less than to show them the difference. And then I show them, well, it's okay if it's a little jagged, you can go back and trim it. Not a big deal. So that would be the second day. Hopefully everybody's finished this layer by the second day and they can move on to the next layer. So the next layer would be whatever you would like underneath that. So a lot of kids get confused at first because they're like, oh, I want to do a turtle and this part will be green. And I'm like, but think about it. The part where you cut out, that's going to be the green part. So actually your second layer should be green. And then they start really thinking about the reductive technique. So then what you would do, of course, you'd have all these parts cut out, is show them that you can slip the next color underneath. And then you don't need the template or the tracers this time. You just draw a smaller shape that mimics the larger shape inside. Have them draw all of them first and then cut. Because if they do one at a time, then it doesn't work out very well for them. They end up being really off. A little snip from the inside, cut, And they really start getting it at this point. Oh, it is reductive. It's making the animal in reverse. Some of them are still really at that very concrete stage. The abstraction is not quite there yet. So you're going to match it up. Show them that they have to match it. Tell them it doesn't matter if the edges are larger, smaller, hanging over. We fix that at the end. And then the last part, get another color that kind of is contrasty. There we go. The last layer doesn't get cut at all. It's just solid. So they would do all of that and then line it up as best they could. And then you're going to give them 4 binder clips, or plastic coated paper clips work well too. And this is just to hold everything together while they sew. So hopefully they're on this third layer, second and third layer by the second or third day. So around the third or fourth day, what you're going to show them is just the basic running stitch. And a lot of them get really excited about this because they know how to sew already, and some of them are nervous because they don't know how to sew, but for the most part they get pretty excited about it either way. And I show them how to use our needle threaders and how to thread a needle both with and without help from the needle threader. And we have all kinds of embroidery floss. There's extra embroidery floss and extra bobbins for winding. Don't do all this work yourself. When you run out of floss, ask somebody to help you because they love doing this. You just have to remind them not to untangle the whole ream of floss at once. Have them just take the ends off and then just drop it like this. I just have them drop it on the floor and wind it. They actually really love doing this. And then have them store it in here. Because some of them, let's just face it, they need an extra job. Or they need a little distraction during the hour because an hour is a little too long for them. So we have lots and lots of different kinds of floss in the Mola making cabinets. Go ahead and replenish as you see fit. For some reason we always run out of black and white first, so I will buy you more of that before you get here. So you're going to have them pick a color that they think will look complementary to their felt colors. And some of them really get into it and think about color meanings and, oh, you know, this color really represents, you know, love, and my animal's about love, and they get really deep. Or some of them are like, I love blue, I'm going to use blue. Okay, that'll work. Usually I lay out pieces of tape on the counter by the felt and the other materials, and I give them, you know, like, tell them don't do more than 25 inches or else it just gets too tangled. And so I show them the easy way to, in my mind anyway, thread a needle. I just pinch between my thumb and my finger and hide the thread, and then just kind of wiggle the needle on top of it and then pull. Show them that this is the tail and it needs to be a little bit long but not too long. And then I show them how to tie a knot at the end. Really, if they tie a loose knot at the end, it should be fine, but some of them like to double knot, but doesn't really matter. So there we go. These needles are sharp but not too sharp. Some kids poke their fingers. We haven't had any major injuries, so that is something to think about though. Just tell them to be careful. Also, I tell them not to put their skin through it. Some of them are strange like that, so tell them that's not acceptable. All these little things that you learn that 6th graders need to know. And also, I tell them that this is their responsibility to return it at the end. What I've been doing very successfully is I actually print out a class list and check off each person's name as they take a needle at the beginning of the hour, and then do it again at the end of the hour. And again, if you need an extra helper, there's always kids that will want to help you with that, so you can make them your checker offer. You just tell them the name as they're going, and it goes really fast. These are so helpful, Erin. This project has been so much more fun with the needle threaders. They're so great to use. So if you use the little hook right here, you just slide your needle over it, and then you just put your thread on the end, and then pull, and it threads the needle. And let me tell you, so much better for them to be able to do it either way than me. So that is how you go about that. And then what they're going to do is do the running stitch, just a simple straight stitch, all the way around all their negative spaces to hold them in place and give it a little bit more contrast, a little bit more detail. So I show them that you have to start on the back, and I say, you know, I don't always look at the back because I'm experienced at sewing, but you can always flip over and check. But always start on the back with a new thread so your knot goes on the back. And then I show them that you want to go down through the fabric close by so you have small even stitches. And some of them, you know, they won't be that even, but encourage them to make them pretty small, not real large, or it doesn't hold it together and it just looks messy. For this part, I always say it's okay if you look on the back, but make sure your hand isn't over the needle. And then I just go around one of them and show them how to go around a curve. And I tell them they can use as many different colors as they want. They can change colors. Some of them get excited because they can do ombre, and whatever works for them is all good. But this part can take quite a while. Sometimes this can take like 2 days of sewing if they're very focused. And most of the time they are very focused once they get to this part. They really enjoy it. One thing that I do tell them is if they have about 4 inches of thread left on their needle, they need to stop and end with a knot on the back. So I pretend that I have a little extra thread at the end, turn it over, and I show them how to tie a knot through, going through the last stitch, going through the loop. You've made a knot, you can do it twice if you'd like. And then I tell them why it's important to cut a tail so that they're not cutting through their work. And this takes some of them a little bit of getting used to, but they get it. Eventually they get it. So they can start again wherever they'd like. So that is what I do like on the 5th day probably, and we do a couple days of just sewing and me helping them. And you know, some of them go really fast because they have sewing experience, and that's totally fine because then they can move on to more decorative stitches as well. Okay. So here are some decorative stitches. That's the back stitch, which is kind of nice for details if they want to do like seaweed or something like that. The satin stitch, which is really nice for like bubbles or filling in forms. Those are French knots. So those are a few assorted things that I show them just as extras if they want to sew in there, but they don't have to. I mean, just if they have the back stitch would be fine. So usually we do, you know, at least 2 or 3 days of sewing. Some kids get to the extra stuff, some kids don't, and that's totally fine. And then at the end, they can take the binder clips off. I encourage them to trim the sides if the second and third layers show. And I show them, you don't have to cut the first layer, you just trim underneath so it looks a little bit more neat and even. Some kids really go to town. They do borders and they learn the buttonhole stitch and they're awesome, but we really just want them to be focusing on that running stitch. And of course, they fill out an evaluation and talk about why this relates to them, and then that becomes part of their grade, and they grade themselves, you grade them. That whole shebang too. So hopefully you enjoy this project, because I know the kids do. If you choose to do it, everything's in the Mola cabinets, and I'll have that marked for you when you get here.